Data enrichment is an extremely powerful tool in product analytics. It's just because you cannot just track everything at the point where you implement your tracking. So you might know this example. You have a setup in your product where you measure your product. And for example, you have an area, let's say you want to analyze lists of tasks. And you implement that, you can see that someone is viewing a list, you can see they filter a list, and then you can also see if they click on an item in a list. But it might be that you start to analyze and then you think, it would be really interesting to not have, for example, the filter IDs or anything else there, but to have more a rich data set to do that. One way would be like, so you ask the developer to implement more information to track the list in a more enriched way. But we all know how this goes. It takes ages until it's implemented. It doesn't make any developer happy to do this. And you have to wait 4-6 weeks until you continue with something that you already have in your head and you want to do. Today we are looking at different ways how to enrich your data without waiting for a developer. Especially if you are capable of writing SQL and you have access to your data warehouse. The outcome of this video is that in the end you learn how you can take an existing event data setup in your product analytics tool and you can add useful information from production databases, from your CRM, from other different kind of systems to get more properties that you can then use to break down the analysis and get more interesting insights. So let's dive into this. This video is sponsored by Mixpanel. Mixpanel has a new way to do product analytics with your warehouse data. You can connect Mixpanel to your data warehouse, and then you can run all the product analytics investigations and all the product analytics deep dives on top of your data warehouse data with clean, prepared, and high quality data. Check out the link in the description to learn more about their offering. I'm using it and I'm extremely happy to have this new kind of setup for product analytics because it unlocks so many more use cases on top of much better data than before. Why do we do data enrichment and product analytics? In the intro, I had one example. I want to make a deep dive on a data set, and so I'm missing information. These are often specific kind of property values. For example, I analyze product performance in an e-commerce shop, and I want to get additional product properties, things that would be really interesting. For example, maybe I can get the margin, then let's say maybe return rate to then enrich my data set to also take this information into account if I want to analyze how many people are checking out this product, how many people are converting to buy this product. This can make it really interesting. This is one thing where I want to enrich the data. Another thing which is really interesting is I have sensitive data. And I would say these were always the most powerful enrichment use cases that I had. When an order has been submitted, I might have some margin information. I could provide the margin for each product that we have in our shop to the front end and track it there. But since the front end is visible for everyone with enough tech background, you would not put your margins in there because then the competition can read out what kind of margins you have on your product. This is sensitive information and you definitely don't want to expose it to anyone. Here, enrichment is extremely powerful because I can enrich the data later when I have full control over the data and it doesn't get in any wrong hands, and I can enrich it with everything that is too sensitive for any kind of front end. So this is the example that we will do today to enrich the data with some information that is coming from backend system. Another example for enrichment is I have different source data. It might be, for example, that you're using a CRM. You have a CRM, and the CRM with a lot of information which is mostly relevant for the sales team, but there are some aspects from that could be super interesting to enrich your product data set with. So for example, sales is collecting information about industry, maybe also about company size. They might have some information about the opportunity status. These all can be interesting to also bring it into the product analytics tool because then you can break down your data by these criteria. For example, you can check how different kind of industry is behaving different in your product, especially when you're in a phase where you really have to find out what kind of ideal customer profile you're looking for. It can also be interesting, for example, if you have something like opportunity status, then you can sync this back into the CRM tool when you have done your analysis, so that then the sales team that is working with CRM gets some insights about the behavior of the people. Can basically create a loop between both systems, and by that makes it really interesting. These are my core 3 use cases where I would use enrichment. But I know there are plenty of more of that. I would say enrichment is a very strong thing that you should do in your product analytics setup. Let's have a look how we can work with this. We have an extended example we want to go through today. We do everything now in Mixpanel. Okay, so here's our scenario. This is the classic e-commerce project. As you can see here, we see classic e-commerce events. We have product details viewed. We have product add to cart. We have order submitted, order returned, list viewed, list searched, and so on. Checkout started. We have the classic thing that you would expect if you track an online store. If we now go in, we can build a classic funnel. So where we start out product details viewed. So then maybe we have add to cart. Then we have checkout started. And then we, of course, have order submitted. This creates a classic funnel for us where we can see we have these many people starting out on checking out which kind of products we have, and then we can see, okay, where we actually get people into adding things into the cart and then starting setup, starting the checkout, and then submitting their order. This is great. We have already a really good data set, but we want to enrich the data set. Our revenue team is super interested not to just see the revenue, but they also would love to see what the profit is. They would love to get a first indicator about the profit. What we can add is we have information about the margin of all the different kind of orders, because this is something that is calculated in our data warehouse. We want to enrich our data set here, that we not only show the revenue, but we also show the margin. Based on the margin, we can then calculate a first level of profit. And so this can then help our revenue team to analyze things here within Mixpanel much easier. This is some information we would never add to the front end to get it in our proper tracking. This is definitely something we want to get into the system by enriching the data later on. And so let's get started. When we want to enrich our data based on our data warehouse data, which is really nice because when we do this with our data warehouse data, it automatically syncs up all the updates in the period that we have defined. So it can do it every hour, it can just do it one time, it can do it every night. It's pretty easy for us to create an enrichment pipeline that updates the data automatically, which is great. We have 2 ways how to do this. One is we can create a specific kind of event, and then with this event we provide additional information, or we use lookup tables to enrich properties based on an ID that is presented in the properties. We do both examples now, but we will start with the event because this is a nice way to, first of all, introduce new events that could be helpful for us, but second of all, helping us to introduce properties, and then I will show you how to make these properties available even across the whole setup, even when this property is not really present in all the different kind of other events. A lot of stuff to cover. Let's get started. Again, we go into project settings, then we go into warehouse data. I already created the connection to my data warehouse, but again, this is pretty straightforward. So you go here, create a connection to your data warehouse or wherever it is, and then we can add different kind of things. So as you can see, for example, here we already add some user data there where we enrich our user information with additional information that we have in our backend systems. We want to create something similar. We will add an additional event that we have modeled in our data warehouse. Let's have a quick look how the table looks like. We have modeled a new event based on the information that we have in the backend. And so the event is called order confirmed. So this is usually the step that happens in our system. In the front end, a user can submit their order. Usually we accept about 99% of all the orders, but we still have some orders that don't get accepted for different kind of reasons. We have some fraud protection built in. Sometimes we don't have the availability of the product, which is not present in the front end. And so there's a final step that's running through, and then afterwards we confirm an order. This is something which is present in our backend systems. And I use this information to create a new table where we have the event order confirmed. We have one information in here, the revenue team is very eager to get hands-on, this is the margin we are looking for. Here we can see we have an order margin, and this is like a percentage that we know we can deduct from the revenue to calculate the margin that we have. And so this is something which is super helpful for us that we want to use now in our data set. And we add a new event where the event is already helpful, but we also introduce a new property that we can then use to calculate things. You will now ask the question, okay, can I just use the order margin just with the order confirmed event? No, we can use it everywhere, and I show you how we do this. But first we have to get this into Mixpanel. Again, if you already watched some videos, you might already be familiar with that. It's a pretty straightforward process to get things from our data warehouse into Mixpanel. So we select the data set that we just had a look at. Then we have our e-commerce enrich table, which just contains the one new event. So then the event name, we define where we can find it. So we find it here in the event name column. And as you can already see, so like it's already building the preview here. So you can see like event name order confirmed, that fits. We have event time with our timestamp field. Then important, we need to have the distinct ID. This is an important step. So if you model something in the data warehouse, you have to make sure that in the end you use a user ID or customer ID that you also use in your front end, so that Mixpanel can match this up, because if not, we could not create any kind of funnel or other kind of analysis that needs to know what happens for one user in different kind of events. So here we have the user ID, and then naturally we also want to have the properties because we're interested in the order margin. So we map the properties here to adjacent properties. In the end, like just quickly recap, this is not really visible here, but here, as we can see here, like properties are in the end are a JSON field. And this is what we have here, and this is what we then use in Mixpanel to map to the JSON properties, because Mixpanel is expecting us to provide a JSON field here. And so this is what we did here. And then you can already see here is like Mixpanel then expands that JSON into different kind of properties that we have provided. Then we can think about how do we sync this. So we will use the append mode. Append means we check for new events coming in, and we do this based on the insert time. In the end, we have a job that generates this table overnight, and so we are just interested in the new order confirmed to load them, and this is what we do is here, append, and we have the timestamp. So far, we don't really have an ID here, so then we can decide, okay, do we do this hourly, or is it like even daily is fine enough? So for us, daily is fine enough because we do this in a batch run in the night, and so we do this just one time a day. And then here we could even like work with the delay to trigger it on a specific point in time, which we don't need at the moment. So let me quickly save that. So we create, this usually takes a little bit, but not so long, as you can see. Let's have a quick look. Let's check. We now have order confirmed. And order confirmed, we have the revenue. And then, of course, we also have the margin. And so let's add this as another one, because then we can calculate a formula. On the one hand, we have our revenue, and we want to subtract from the revenue the margin that we have to end up with, let's say, a first level of profit. And so this will then have us add the margin to it. And so this will be B. Let's see how this looks like. Let's quickly rename that. And let's call this profit, let's say profit 1. We have introduced this as a new metric in this analysis, where we can really see, okay, this is actually the revenue that we made, and this is the profit 1 that we have calculated. We could even then now calculate a percentage of that, and so we can do different kind of things with that. But this is already pretty powerful for the revenue team to do additional things with that. This is information that you would never track somewhere. This is just information that you can only enrich later, because this is sensitive information that you would not add to a system where everyone who comes to the website can see that. One question that maybe come up, okay, this is nice, I just have it, but I just have it for the order confirmed. we work, as I already told you, order confirmed and order submitted is almost the same, but we still have, let's say, have a gap of 1 or 2%. We might want to do some analysis even further. We might want to do it already on order submitted, or maybe even a step further when something is added to the cart, so that we already have a margin calculation there as well. And how can we do this? Because we don't have order margin present there. So let me introduce you to a new feature that Mixpanel just introduced some weeks ago, and this is borrowed properties. Let me explain how this works. We start from a blank slate. We are now, for example, interested in orders submitted, and we want to have the order margin there as well, because we want to run an analysis. As you can see here, we just have the revenue to calculate something. What we can do is we can click here on create. Then we can say we are interested in order margin. And now comes the important part, which took me some time to figure out. So we go into formula, and then we press period. As you can see here, it also tells us we press the period, and then we get access to this kind of dialog. We go into computed section, we go to borrow property, and then we can select the event we want to borrow the property from. And so in our case, it's order confirmed. And then we pick the order margin. And that's it. So now when we save that, now we get the sum of order margin, which of course doesn't really make sense. So we are more interested in the average order margin. But now we have the order margin also available for all the different kind of orders, for orders submitted, which makes it really powerful for us to use it. And this is something we can now even use if we wanted to, because we just created it. We can now even go, let's say, go add to cart. And then, again, we can have the average of order margin in there. Another example, what we could have done with borrowed property would be for example, I could create a borrowed property from the search term that people use on lists, and then use this borrowed property later in adding to cart to analyze what led the people to add stuff to the cart. So what was the initial list? Borrowed property is a powerful new feature in Mixpanel that you should definitely test and check out, because it's not always that you have all the properties for all events, but now you really have the possibility to make sure to use it in every part. This was our first example to do an enrichment. Now we have a second example. What we can also do is, so we are interested in the merchandising team came to us and asked us, look, we run a lot of our list optimizations. We invest a lot of time to improve our shop lists. And we are running a lot of experiments now. And we have different kind of lists, but we group them in different kind of groups. And for us, it would be interesting if we can use these groups within the data set, because then we can break down the list performance by these different kind of groups. Yes, we already asked development. They can add it in 4 weeks when the next 2 sprints are ended, but this takes us too long. And we would also like to have it on historical data, because we're still figuring stuff out. For us, it would be super helpful to do this. We have a mapping provided, and with this mapping, we then go in and we just create a first table so we then got the mapping from the category team, and we created a new table in our data warehouse where we have list status. And just have a quick look. So here we have the list name, and then we have list status. What we want to do is we want to enrich the property which is already in our Mixpanel data, which is called list name. We want to enrich it with a status. With the status, then we can run all the different kind of breakdowns. How we can do that? So again, we go to warehouse data, and then we create a lookup table instead of an event table. Again, we pick our sources, we pick the right data set. Then we check for the table that I just showed you. Let's list status. And then we look for the join key. And so the join key is how can we join it with the existing property in Mixpanel. In this case, it's list name. And then we have to select the property in Mixpanel where we want to match it up with. And this in the end is also list name. And Here we can decide, again, it could be totally enough to just do it one time. I will do it one time in a second. Because marketing just prepared these categories and just the new mapping they want to use. But it could be that it's a constant experiment going on from the category team. So it could be that because like they're experimenting so a lot, they change the definitions for the different kind of category pages and they introduce new category pages and so on. This is an ongoing thing. Then a full thing that runs on a day is the best solution. And this is really the nice thing with the Lookup integration from the data warehouse, that you just set up a pipeline that automatically updates. So once the table is updated in the warehouse, this updates then gets synced into Mixpanel here on a daily base, or you could even go down and say, okay, on an hourly base. So right now we would just do a one-time import because for the purpose of the analysis, this is sufficient. We created it and now it's already active. It's already filled in. It was not really big, so we just had 70 rows, so this was quite straightforward. What we can do is we have list viewed. We can break it down by list name, so this is like the property that we were already checking in our SDK. So let me just quickly change this a little bit to, let's show it in a table. And so you can see like list name, so here we can see how often this has been viewed. But what we can also do is we can bring in the list status now. And so what we can do is like we have list name. And as you can see here, because we did the mapping, now we have an arrow here on the right, which means it's like we have access to something that was mapped to the list name. So we click here, now we have list status. If you don't see this, it might take some minutes to propagate throughout the system. You set up the warehouse load, you load it, and then you wait a little bit, and then you refresh everything, and then you check it. Don't be confused. It can take some time until it's propagated and available. And so we can pick the list status here. Now we have this 5 group that the merchandising team was looking for. For them, it's super interesting to now see the experiment bucket gets a lot thing. Coming back as a final closing the loop thing to the board properties, what we can also now see is, so what we could do is we go into product details viewed, and then we want to have a breakdown by these list types. But list types are definitely not present for product details viewed because it's something that we mapped to something that happens with the list viewed event. But it's still interesting because they want to see how many of their new list types are driving traffic to the product detail pages. Again, we can do the same thing what we did before. We can create a new custom event property. We call it list types. And again, we go in here, we press period, computed properties, we go to list viewed, and here we pick list status and press save. We can now use the list types also for product details viewed. And now we can see which is driving users to product details viewed. And we could even now build a funnel from that, which is also really great. We could build a funnel from list viewed to product details views broken down by the list types, which is extremely powerful. These are just 2 examples of what you can do with enrichment. To quickly recap where enrichment is really helpful. The first example was about sensitive data. It was about specific kind of data that we don't want to show in our front end when we track something with an SDK. And it might also be like, this is something that we calculate. So for example, like the margin here, the order margin is a calculated value. So we don't want to calculate it all the time on the fly when the request is happening. It's much more better for us to calculate it one time overnight and then enrich the data set in Mixpanel overnight as well. Use case number 2 is we have additional information that, for example, is conducted by a different kind of team, like our merchandising team is clustering their category pages by specific kind of criteria, and they want to use this information now in Mixpanel as well. Here we can enrich something with additional information that has been created somewhere else, for example, in a spreadsheet. And it's a really great way to do this from the data warehouse. And as the final thing to know, there's one new feature in Mixpanel that you really should try out, and this is board properties, where you can introduce a new property for one event, but you can use it along the whole journey of different kind of events, because in the end, if it happens one within a user journey, you can basically access this from all the different kind of events. One thing to keep in mind is you always access the last instance of it. So for example, our list viewed example here is if someone checks out 10 different lists and then goes to the product detail page, we will track the last instance that has been tracked. So this is like a last touchpoint attribution model under the hood. This is important to know when you work with these different kind of things. This creates really powerful new possibilities to do more things with your product analytics setup. If you have any kind of questions about this, leave them in the comment. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel to see more of these kind of videos. And if you really like the video, just give me this helps me a lot, and see you in the next video.